And good evening. It's August 6th, right? 2024, and we're in our next collection of discussions in our Outside the Class series. Because it's a series from the Bible Project. It's about the entire TaNaK, the entire Old Testament. On TheDustyFeet.com, in that Outside the Class section, we have this TaNaK, this Old Testament source video section, set up for your review. Because the intent of Outside the Class is for you to listen to that in-class lecture first. They would be found in the source video playlist, again from the Bible Project. We're going to try to keep these to about 15 minutes or so, because we'll make them easy to catch and easier to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but maybe with a fun and different twist on Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet. And of course, before we forget, if you do find these kinds of podcasts useful, that's when you click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think that these might be useful to other folks, well, then that's when you click that like button, because this is the way the YouTube chooses to share these to more folks, if they wish. So in this series, we're going to be covering the entire TaNaK, right? The Old Testament. Yet, we're going to be doing it in the original order of this collection, right? The Hebrew Scriptures order. So, it could get really interesting as we get past these first 5. So, the TaNaK, Old Testament, Exodus, Shemot, chapters 1 through 18. We need to remember in these videos, when we discuss these, they're just the tip of the iceberg. They're part of this learning series that, again, I highly recommend. And again, they're all found on the Bible Project website as well. And of course, our source video playlist. But that's because when we're in this series, I want you to remember that there's probably going to be more questions than there are answers at times. We're going to try to respond, right, to some of the information. And yet, as we discuss it, I'm just going to leave it up to you if you think that that happens to be an answer. Because there's going to be a lot of questions we're going to be asking about all kinds of things that maybe we're not going to get or know an exact answer. Because it is just what it is. It's Shemot. It's Exodus. Chapters 1 through 18. So we're at the beginning of Exodus. So we need to remember that these are not isolated books, right? This is a long and winding story. And it's like, I don't know, you'd almost think this is like kind of just another chapter, but maybe it's like another book. It just picks up right at the end of another, like J.R.R. Tolkien's books, right? The Lord of the Rings. That's really 6 books, yet they're grouped into 3, 2 of each, and yet they tell one singularly focused tale. Like we broke up Genesis into 2 sections, as it were, the global view, and then we're zoomed in right to Abraham and the building up of this large community of people. So now we're going to take these people from the land of Egypt to a very specific place. We're going to eventually walk them to Mount Sinai. Just at this time in Egypt, it's about 400 years total. And it contains, right, both good and bad times. Weird things pop into my head. Things like, it was about 400 years between the last prophet and the birth of Jesus. I mean, lots of these. And that Egypt plays a part in that story as well. It's just ironically the role is flipped. I love God's way of unfolding stories and giving us hints of connections and God's way of change. But at the beginning of the children of Israel's tale, we have a very supportive and very helpful Pharaoh. By the time we get the opening events in Exodus, there's a change of command. Let's just say that these same children of Israel they're now out of favor in the land. Their fear and paranoia have replaced those thoughts of before. But they're doing as they've been told, right? They're being fruitful, they're multiplying, and they're blessing the place. Egypt is very much benefiting from these people being there. God's covenant people with Abraham in action, on display. Like Tim mentioned, this scrolls basically has two main themes as well through it. Right? The first 18 chapters, right, from the end of Genesis to the middle of there, we're going to have the pre-run to Mount Sinai. And then after that, we're going to have 19 through 40. That's basically the post-Sinai run. But Sinai being the focused event, the key event. In Exodus, it's Mount Sinai. Everything is built around this journey to get there. I know it's another series that we're going to be doing with the Sermon on the Mount, but this is one of those things that gets me where Sinai is the pivotal moment, right, for these followers that are going to be the followers of Yahweh, right? These followers of God, these Yod-He, Vav-He. This is the pivotal moment. This is where the big teaching comes, right? This is where they get God's guidance and wisdom for the future. We're going to get there. But with Jesus, we're seeing that on, let's call it another Mount event, his Sermon on the Mount, we get, I'd say, his big moment as well. Because this is where he ties himself to his Father with the events of this scroll in Exodus, this Shemot, the guidance and the wisdom that we're going to see from God. Later, with his Son, we can tell they are so interconnected. They're so interwoven. Because these two Mount events, they echo both ways for sure. In probably in more ways than we even realize. These whole stories are wrapped around two key figures. Because we're beginning to get this. Now it's becoming normal, these echoes, these various points in the stories. The garden at the front, the covenant with Abraham is going to have its red strings tied in. They're going to be attached. There is actually a lot going on here. Did you catch that subtle point that Tim made? And I liked it, about where Pharaoh was rebelling against God. Because the blessings that are promised with the covenant with Abraham, there are things that Pharaoh is actually rebelling against. It's like Tim echoed, the good has become bad. You know, that's a scary way to view things. And at times, maybe we might even have some of those thoughts about some other things. I'm going to leave that for another tale. But God's promises. Pharaoh actually views these people, or they view these people, and he thinks they're a curse to the land. He thinks they're bad, and he's going to rebel against it. You know, it's an interesting thought to feel threatened by God's blessing. I guess things could get twisted, the good, the bad, even back then. You know, while at times we tend to see this time as a passive blessing of God, this growth and such, right? We're going to begin to see these stories of God, right? He's going to start to take a very active role, right? As this story unfolds, we're going to see it. Because remember, Pharaoh's fear, first he oppresses them, then he says, okay, I'm going to do more work. I'm going to work harder with less for me. And he has an entire generation of Jewish boys killed. All the boys were to be killed, tossed into the Nile. And in that, in a way, there's another video that covers this too from Tim. I loved it. And it covers up those children in the Nile, it covers up that horrendous crime. I want to take a quick pause. We have an echo forward, maybe another echo back. I love echo sounds, even though I have hearing aids, right? Because in the stories that surround Jesus, we have so many related topics. We have so many related elements. We have mounts. We have Egypt. We have killing children. We have fleeing death. We have being raised in unexpected places. Oh, and we have that attached phrase, a prophet likened unto Moses. So this seems that it's going to be a very, very important part of the story. Because again, there's a lot going on. It's fascinating. It's wonderful. It's eye-opening to see these connections that we find wrapped around all of these stories. And don't you just find the story of Moses just a bit ironic? To Pharaoh, I mean. Isn't this one of those points where God says, okay, I'll show you how something can be done, and I'm going to make you a part of it. I will have the one that's going to lead these very blessings to your land, these covenant promises of mine. You're going to raise him. He will not only be rescued from your genocide event, this one that will lead these very people out of this land, he will be raised by your own, under your very nose. Your own daughter will raise him. You will feed him, clothe him, nurture his growth, educate him, even train him. You will be part of the very preparation of the leader that I need to walk these children out of this land under your control. When Jesus echoes similar elements, but with Egypt, this time Egypt's the rescue place for a time. Yes, and he is raised there, and he does begin his learning there. But to Pharaoh, I'm going to have your own daughter raise him. This will be the one who will actually take my people out of your Egypt. Promises, covenants, commitment from God. The way that God can take similar elements and weave them differently into another story. That we have the opportunity to see those red string-like connections, right? Those points that are going to remind us that these have to be connected. And if you think that these just might be similar events that just happen to be coincidental, right? We haven't even brought up the connections of 12 tribes, 12 disciples, 40 years, 40 days, testing, response. And the responses that bring us back top to where we're heading. Because those responses, they only began the story to Mount Sinai. So next week, we're going to get into some more of Moses, right? More of his choices as he grows up and interaction with God. Because God is about to get very, very hands-on for much of the rest of this story. Maybe things could have been viewed as passive, but eventually, we're not going to be able to deny the finger of God, and good and bad will apply. We have more of the promise to see. This is going to continue to be fun and challenging, so thanks you're with us tonight on another edition of Outside the Class, the TaNaK, that Old Testament, on the Dusty Feet.